Kim Souza writes in her article titled, "Consumers Expected to Spend $10.6 billion for Halloween," quote, "Adults are expected to spend $1.7 billion on their costumes and another $1.2 billion on kids' costumes, with a whopping $710 million on pet costumes," end quote. This goes to show just how much money goes into costumes alone on a typical year of Halloween. We all know the holiday Halloween, from the never-ending replays of movies like Hocus Pocus to the endless things to carve into a pumpkin. We all have some experiences that we think of when we think of the holiday. By the end of this speech, I will provide you all with some additional insight into one of the most well-known holidays in the world. Starting with early history of Halloween. The holiday originates from the night of Samhain, which is the Celtic calendar symbol of it is pictured on the right, and it is the night before the Celtic holiday All Saints Day pictured on the left, which originated in Ireland about 2,000 years ago. The dominant religion at this time was Celtic paganism, which is a polytheistic religion that worships multiple gods, nature, and believes in an afterlife. Leslie Bannatyne, in her article titled "When Halloween Mischief Turned to Mayhem," quote, she gives a brief description of Samhain. Quote, "It was the Gaelic festival of Samhain, summer's end, the beginning of the dangerous season of darkness and cold, which, according to folklore, created a rift in reality that set spirits free from both good and bad," end quote. All Saints' Day is a medieval Christian holiday meant to respect and honor the dead. Waxman, in her article titled "How Trick-or-Treating Arrived in America," provides a brief description of a common tradition during All Saints' Day. Quote, "The poor went to the homes of the wealthy and offered to pray for the recently departed in that household. It was believed that more prayers meant his soul was more likely to be saved," end quote. However, as the Protestant Reformation rolled around in the country, the difference in religious ideology with like souls changed and made Samhain less religious of a holiday and more secular as time went on. Waxman also writes in her article how this new form where Samhain turned to Halloween went to the US. Quote, "By the 1840s, when a wave of Irish and Scottish immigrants brought the custom to the US, it was basically a secular pastime," end quote. Moving to the US and how it was shaped there, Halloween was originally very much embraced by Americans from the immigrants, where it was basically a night of pranks and mischief. But what was originally harmless pranks and mischief, once the early 20th century rolled around, it turned into a time of where teens and preteens would often challenge authority figures and would commit illegal acts like vandalism. Adults retaliated against this behavior, obviously, by some wanted to create new traditions for the holiday instead of the vandalism that it caused. Some wanted to try and get rid of Halloween altogether, and some would actually try to defend their property from any preteens who would run around their house to avoid it from getting vandalized by threatening children with pellet guns. However, a common tradition that we know of today called trick-or-treating was invented in the 1930s and throughout time calmed the US down with this holiday by teaching small children that if you ask politely for candy or just be polite in general, you will receive rewards such as candy, which is how trick-or-treating was formed. With such a deep-rooted past, it's easy for a split to occur between traditions and values. In this case, All Saints' Day did in fact lead to the creation of not one but two holidays. Halloween versus Day of the Dead. Halloween, where it is focused on the scary and spooky and creepy, it always has been, then and now, with then where Europeans once performed traditions out of fear of any bad spirits, and moving forward to now where we seek scares because it gives us an adrenaline rush or any thrill. However, the Day of the Dead is much different in its meaning. Julia Preston writes in her article, The Day of the Ghouls versus the Day of the Dead, quote, "Just as European settlers brought the tradition to the United States, the Spanish spread it in Mexico. But in this country, the European practice melded with the beliefs of the Aztecs and other indigenous peoples for whom death was an intimate and enthralling spiritual being," end quote. This shows the early shift between the two and how the two were formed over time. Where Halloween values the spooky and creepy and supernatural, Day of the Dead highly values remembering and celebrating deceased loved ones and just celebrating their lives and remembering them. 3 customs that shine out with Day of the Dead compared to Halloween where they are not present would be the first on the left being offerings, which are altars or centerpieces often built indoors, like homes or stores, but can be found in cemeteries. They are meant to welcome the spirits back to the living world, because that is believed a time when they roamed the living world. They often have physical offerings such as food and water, which are believed to help refresh them after their long journey, along with toys if it's a child, or family photos to give the deceased loved ones. Marigolds in the center are a common flower used to decorate graves and are used to create pathways. They are believed to help guide spirits back to their graves once the holiday is over. And the last one being skulls, which represent each loved one and are often made with either wood, paper mache, or sugar paste, and are almost always painted with bright colors and vibrant, unique patterns. Santana writes in her article, "It's not either/or, it's both. Halloween and Dia de los Muertos." Quote, "While both holidays may be considered spooky, Halloween revolves around darkness, death, ghosts, witches, candy, and costumes. On the other hand, Day of the Dead is explicitly about the afterlife and remembrance." End quote. This just perfectly summarizes the difference between the two. After rummaging through Halloween's past, we can now look at its present-day success and adapted traditions from an era before. Moving to present day, an article describes 2 adapted traditions pretty well, titled "Halloween History, Where Do Our Favorite Halloween Traditions Come From?" It shows the difference today between jack-o'-lanterns. Quote, "People there carved scary faces into hollowed-out turnips or potatoes and placed candles or pieces of burning coal inside. They set their glowing vegetables in windows to scare off wandering spirits." End quote. This shows that although we might think of jack-o'-lanterns as only pumpkins, they were not always that way. Another common tradition would be why we wear costumes in the first place. Quote, "They wore costumes made of animal skins and animal heads to protect themselves from any spirits that happened to cross their paths." End quote. So as we might dress up just for the fun of it now, it was used to hide themselves from any bad spirits back then. That was quoted from the same article. Along with present-day success, a total of $10.6 billion is expected to be spent this year, higher than the normal amount due to COVID years, which makes sense when you think about it. Most people might think the last years were dull, and they might want to go all out this year, which leads to the rise in money. Souza writes in her article as before, quote, "Adults who plan to purchase costumes said they are most likely to be witches, in parentheses 5.3 million, quote." End quote. This shows just how much people are willing to dress up for this holiday. And that's just one category. In my speech, I provided the class additional information on Halloween by looking through its past, the holiday it's closely related to, and its place in our world today. I hope this information you all received today will help you appreciate the holiday more by having a better understanding of why we do certain traditions and how Halloween came to be. Thank you for listening.